Hi, Zoe. You can hear me okay? It's great to
I
see you again, by the
can.
way. Good to see you.
Yeah, good
Good
to
to see
see
you.
you.
You're looking good. It's good to see. I know it's been a rough time for some folks, but Zoe, if you don't
I'm
mind, can
good.
you just
Have a
briefly
blast,
just give us
guys.
your background real quick? Okay.
Yeah,
If you can
sure.
just give us a quick little background on you, so that people
Yeah,
aren't familiar with you.
okay. Quick little background on me. I went to Cambridge University. I did maths and economics. So I'm pretty analytical by background. I then went into management consultancy, which is what people did at that time if they didn't know what they wanted to do. And I ended up working for Mars, the confectionery company. Then I ended up working for SmithKline Beecham just before it became GlaxoSmithKline. So I've seen big food and big pharma from the inside. And I ended up in my corporate career as a global VP, Vice President of Human Resources. So I was really interested in people and what motivates people and why people do what they do. And the financial crash around 2008, I got the opportunity to leave the corporate world and to follow my passion, I guess. So I had been writing books in the background. I'd written the first one in 2004. I'd always been fascinated by the obesity epidemic and why people find themselves craving certain foods when they don't want to be overweight. They find themselves eating a packet of cookies and they don't want to be doing that. It just made no sense. So I'd been writing books in parallel and then got to the point where I thought, okay, let's have a change of career and see if I can make what I love doing, which is diet and nutrition and analysing academic articles and just basically researching nutrition at that academic level, see if I could make that what I actually do. And I managed to do it. I don't earn what I earned in the corporate world, but I don't care because I'm happier and doing what I enjoy doing.
Yeah, amen to that. And I think that's, I certainly feel the same way. I enjoy what I do a lot more, even though, the financial rewards are not what it was as a surgeon. I mean, it was fairly easy to make money as a surgeon, and it's more challenging. But it's, again, you have a lot more satisfaction in what you do. You can sleep better at night. Let me ask you, you've been, I guess, on a number of things you would be considered a contrarian. I think is a polite way of saying. Some people would use other terms, but you've talked about the fact that the justification for sort of demonizing animal fat in particular, or saturated fat, is not really there. I know you've been critical of, I think, some of the thought around cholesterol. I think, and then also, and recently we've all been sidetracked by this pandemic. I mean, a lot of us are like, we just don't think this is very much a science-based approach based on what we're seeing and what we're doing. So, how do you what because some people say, well, these people who do this are just crazy, they're just crazy. And I don't, I guess when I see people that are going against the mainstream narrative, I'm like, what is the lure? Because I mean, most of us just getting beat up. I mean, it's not like we're masochists or something like that. We enjoy being attacked and, or having careers ruined and stuff like that. But what is motivating you to continue to, speak out, I suppose?
Oh, that's a good question. Do you know, I've been with a lot of children over the Christmas period. And the thing that I absolutely love about children, particularly toddlers, is they just question everything. And whatever you tell them, their next question is why? How does that work? Why? What's going on? And I've never lost that. I was just encouraged to be like that with my parents. And it was just how I was at school. So if the teacher said, something in maths or something, if it didn't make sense to me, I'd be the one saying, well, I still don't see how you got that. And there was some stuff that, quite frankly, I should have challenged a lot earlier than I did. So like many females, particularly teenage girls, I felt a bit chubby. I thought I need to go on a diet. I picked up a diet book in the local store, and it said, if you cut back by 3,500 calories, you will lose 1 pound of fat. And I remember going on this thing, and of course, the first week you lose more than that. It's probably not fat, it's mostly water. And then a few weeks, not even months down the line, nothing's happening. And you've still created that calorie deficit. So there and then I should have been able to say, well, that doesn't work. That's not true. It's a lie. It's the cruelest promise that dieters have ever been told, but it took me a long time before I broke that one down. And I kind of went back to doing what I did as a child. So I wrote to the authorities in the UK. So I wrote to Public Health England, the International Association of Obesity. There were 7 organizations, basically, dietitians organization, the equivalent of the American Dietetic Association, and basically said, this 3,500 calorie theory, it says this, can you source it for me, first of all? When did it first come into the literature? And then can you prove it? And they just couldn't. It's like, but it's in all of your literature. You're still going out there saying people need to eat less and or do more to the tune of 3,500 calories, and then thou shall lose 1 pound of fat. And it's not true. And then, as I say, obesity absolutely fascinated me. And what I couldn't understand was why we had an obesity epidemic, because I had never met anyone who was okay being overweight, let alone obese. And I thought, this just doesn't make sense. So to understand the epidemic, you've got to go back to when the epidemic started. And it started a little bit earlier in the US than it did in the UK. And the US, I mean, there's that famous chart from the NHANES CDC chart, and it just takes off like an airplane. I mean, you know the chart, it takes off around the 1976 to 1980 period. So of course you say, well, what happened then? Now, a number of things could have happened, but one thing that did happen was that we changed our dietary advice, and we started telling people that they needed to eat a low-fat diet. Because there's only 3 things that we eat, and this was a bit of a penny drop moment for me. There's only protein, carbohydrate, and fat. Protein, as you know well, Shawn, tends to be about 15 to 20% of any natural diet. It just is, even a veggie diet, it's around there. So the minute you tell somebody to cut fat, you've immediately told them to have a high carb diet. And then obesity just took off like an aeroplane. And the UK was just a couple of years behind because we changed our dietary guidelines a couple of years later. So my PhD was then to look at that, to say, well, was that right? Was there evidence for changing our dietary advice back in 1977 in the US and 1983 in the UK? Let's look at the evidence that was there at the time. Let's look at all the randomized controlled trial evidence. And there were 6 randomized controlled trials. Let's then look at the epidemiological evidence, and there were about the same number of cohort studies. And then let's pull them together in this modern technique of meta-analysis and see if there was evidence for those guidelines. And of course, the answer is no, there wasn't. So then, to be fair, you say, okay, well, we're now 30 years on. Is the evidence there available now? Let's rerun every RCT we've got available today, and let's run all the cohort evidence we've got available today. Does it also say that we should have demonized dietary fat, and particularly saturated fat? And again, the answer is no. So I just find the more you question stuff, the more you find you were right to question it. I don't think I've ever questioned anything and then come to a dead end immediately because everything I've ever been told was right. Just doesn't happen.
Yeah, and I think the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And I just come away with this saying, I don't think we know very much at all. I mean, we're starting to see some things, but there's a long ways to go. And, the nutrition science, as you know, is very imperfect.
Yeah.
And it's very challenging to do in human beings. You can't just, take the humans and cut them up at the end of the study. I mean, it's just not how it works. And there's a lot of ethical things that preclude us from doing, I guess, truly good studies. One of the things, we see this battle between low fat and low carb, and, people say it's all about calories. Do you find that, and I think there's some physiology that supports this, that when you include, a certain amount of carbohydrate in the diet, particularly in a mixed meal, it decreases satiety. Is that what's the cause? Is this because it makes us overeat them more? Or is it just, do you think it's more like, David Unwin or Gary Taubes might say there's a unique physiologic, metabolic or hormonal thing that's going on, or is it just down to satiety?
That's a really interesting one, actually. When I first started looking at this, and I had the good fortune, my first job when I left Cambridge was with this management consultancy firm. And they actually then posted me to the US because I was single and I didn't have a flat. So it's like, hey, you can go over there and work out of Boston for a while, which was just brilliant. And the bookshops over there were light years ahead of the bookshops over in the UK. So I just remember browsing all these bookshops. And I was suffering with food addiction at the time. I just couldn't stop eating things that I didn't want to be eating. I found the more I tried to avoid certain things, the more I craved them. And I thought, Is that just because I shouldn't be trying to give these things up? It's a question of you want what you can't have. You know, I was really trying to understand it from my own perspective. But I knew a lot of friends who were going through the same thing. When I'd been at Cambridge, I was actually the women's officer of my college. And I remember going up to the central training session, and they said, oh, you know, there's all these things about eating disorders at the moment, and there's something called bulimia, and there's something called, you know, just compulsive overeating or whatever. And I was thinking, well, no one's going to have that. That's just kind of what I do in my room. You know, I eat too much and then feel bad about it. And there were only 24 women, I think there were in my intake year. Cambridge was a bit slow in getting women into the college. And I put some stuff in the pigeonhole and said, look, if any of the other women are interested. And 23 out of 24 came to talk to me. I mean, that's how prevalent it was. So when I was exploring this, I was really trying to understand food cravings. And I saw books over in America, and I saw books on things like hyperglycemia. So it was low blood glucose and you know, Carlton Fredericks was one of the authors, I remember. Then there was a whole group of books on yeast syndrome and Candida albicans. That was sort of Leo Chato, Trowbridge, Walker. And then there was a whole batch on food intolerance, people like Richard McCarness. And I read the whole books, and there were passages in the books where they would describe their patients going to the 7-Eleven in the middle of the night and just piling the grocery cart with ice cream and cookies and cakes, and then eating as if they had this compulsion and not even registering what they were eating. And then they just move on in the book and go back to talking about hyperglycemia or food intolerance or you know, gut flora imbalance. And I just remember thinking, you had something really important there. You should go back to that, because you had a secret there to what is going on with millions and millions of Brits and Americans and Canadians and Australians worldwide. And I kind of pieced together the diets that each of those, the doctors working in those 3 different areas were recommending. And it was best summarized by, I think it was Trowbridge and Walker, who said that the diet, the core diet you want to get down to, they summarized as MEVI, which was meat, fish, eggs, vegetables, and yogurt. But it was full fat, natural, plain yogurt, ideally with the bacteria in it, the acidophilus, the stuff that was going to restore your gut flora. And I tried it. And I remember for about 5 days thinking I was going to die. I mean, the withdrawal symptoms I had were just immense, from sugar, white flour, caffeine, all kinds of things. But at the end of 5 days, I had this sort of mental clarity and this feeling of being well that I just hadn't had for a few years. And that was it. I mean, that was phase 1 of what then went on to be what I recommended when I wrote books about overeating and food cravings. It's like, go back to that core. Why does it only need to be 5 days to break that? Because stuff passes through us in that time. So even something that we're intolerant to, we can actually get out of the system in quite a short period of time. And we can actually then feel quite dramatically better. You know, looking back now, it was clearly a very low carbohydrate diet. And that would have been the other thing that I was experiencing. I'd gone from probably 300-400 grams of carbohydrate a day to maybe 20 to 50, maybe almost the perfect kind of ketogenic diet, but just didn't make that connection at the time. Now I don't have to eat that kind of low level of carbohydrate personally any longer. This is where I think the individuality may come in. I know people who can't move away from that kind of level of carbohydrate without the cravings coming back. And I don't know that it's necessarily about satiety. I really do think that there's something in condition-driven cravings. People who've overeaten will tell you there is no satiety. You can eat cookies and ice cream and chips and crisps and chocolate and the rest of it. You can just eat it without any kind of limit, in a way that you just can't eat real food in that way. So yeah, one makes you full, but the other doesn't make you full. But I think there's something else going on. And then there's the whole psychological aspect, of course, which is huge, which is that we've evolved, or we've been brought up to think that food is going to cheer us up. Food is a reward. Food is what you get when things are not going so well, and it will make you feel better. And all of that needs breaking as well. So there's a physical side and there's an emotional, psychological side, and both of them need to be broken to get people eating in the way that they should eat.
Yeah, I definitely see there's a physiology and the psychology that goes in this, and you know, fully on board with that. We don't have much in the way of support from most people, at least in the standard healthcare system, because this is what we're mostly seeing: people with all these different chronic diseases, whether they be metabolic or inflammatory, autoimmune. They all seem to have a common denominator in the fact that the lifestyle is contributing to it, at least in some way, in many cases, a majority of the way. And yet we, as a healthcare system, kind of don't have any sort of facilities to deal with that. Is that just incompetence? Is there some sort of reason? Is there a conflict of interest? I mean, a lot of people say, well, it doesn't serve, it's not a good business model to get people healthy. Is that a fair thing to say, or do you think there's just a lack of understanding?
I think it's complex. I've looked into it and particularly I've looked into it in the UK, but I've also looked into it with the American Dietetic Association and the Australian Dietetic Association. And then, of course, also the South African, when I was trying to help Prof. Noakes with his trial down there. It's conflict. And in the UK, in the school curriculum, we've got what I call the eat badly plate. We have this sort of plate which is just absolutely stacked full of carbohydrates. You'll barely find a piece of meat. There might be a tiny little token piece of oily fish, maybe an egg, but they want us eating pasta and rice and potatoes and cereals, just carb. I mean, it's just dreadful. And you can see the influence of the fake food industry. So Public Health England actually appointed, when they last looked at the so-called healthy eating guideline for the UK, they put together a panel of 11 people. I ended up with an article in the British Journal of Sports Medicine after uncovering this. And they invited the head of the Institute of Grocery Distribution, the Food and Drink, our equivalent of the Food and Drink Federation, the Association for Convenience Stores, which is kind of the representatives of the 7-Elevens. I mean, it was just every organization that existed to optimize the profits of big food. And they were put in charge of coming up with this plate. And there were a couple of other token people. There was somebody from the dairy industry. There was somebody who should have been neutral because she was a dietitian, but then dietitians are also conflicted and funded by these same big food organizations. Our dietitians are all partnered with baby formula, which is particularly heinous in my view. So they start human beings really, really young on being hooked on this just completely fake food. So it's conflict from cradle to grave. The conflicts are embedded. We are being told what to eat by the fake food industry, who profits from us eating what they want us to eat. And how much does big pharma and big food work hand in hand? I don't know. I don't know if they sit around a table and say, hey, you keep pushing the cereal and we'll keep pushing the diabetes medications. I don't know if it's that organized or if it's just a naturally symbiotic relationship that ends up working in some way, organized or not. But it's conflict. There are some dietitians, they've probably got good intentions and have just gone along with it. But if they don't question what they're being taught in dietetic school, then I've got no time for them. You don't just sit there in the front row and somebody puts up a plate and says that's what people should eat and not say why. Where's the evidence behind that? 5 a day, why? Where's the evidence behind that? I've got no time for someone who isn't going to take ownership for their own learning and check that it's actually valid.
Yeah, I've heard you mention that before, and I hope you don't mind talking about this. 5 a day, and we have, that's what people have been taught. Now it's 10 a day or something like that. But where did that come from? Was it, my understanding is that somebody said, it sounds like a good number, let's just throw it out there. Where's the science behind 5 a day?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. When I was looking into this, when I was writing my obesity book, so research was going on for this back in 2006, 7, 8. And at that time, I managed to trace it back to a meeting in California of the Produce for Better Health Foundation and the National Cancer Institute in the US. The National Cancer Institute have trademarked the term 5 a day, so we know there's a bit of evidence base there. And I remember finding the material at the time about this meeting that they'd held, and I got the details of the attendees, and it was things like the Potato Association, the Blueberry Association, There were some logistics organizations that moved fruit and vegetables around the country. It was organizations that basically benefited if people would eat more fruit and vegetables. There was no science presented in any of the meeting notes that I could find. And I think it was probably a case of they got to the end of the meeting, people said, this has all been well and good, but we want an outcome. So what do we want? We want people to eat more fruit and veg. How much more fruit and veg? Well, I don't know, 3, not very ambitious. 7, oh, bit of a stretch. 5, number of digits on one hand, it's a nice round number. It really wasn't any more scientific than that. I've heard somebody in the UK who was the head of the UK Obesity Forum. They said they thought it emanated in the back of a taxi in a couple of people who'd gone to a meeting in Brussels. Brussels obviously being the centre of the European Union, but it was the same kind of story that came from this guy. His name was Tam Fry, and his story also went, it was just a number, it was plucked out of the air, it had no evidence base. The alcohol numbers are the same. In the UK, we're told women should have no more than 14 units of alcohol, men should have no more than 21. And one of the guys who was on one of the original panels got in big trouble with the other panel members for saying it's just a number. We just picked it out of the air. 8 glasses of water a day. Some people think that's scientific. That's just another number picked out of the air. So when something like that falls, for me, it was the calorie theory. When something that I had invested time in, I had believed, I had stuck to, I thought if I make this sacrifice, I'm going to get this reward. When something like that crumbles, I then just start questioning everything. And I remember in the cholesterol area, I remember when I first started looking at dietary fat, and I wasn't finding evidence against dietary fat, but everywhere I looked, I was reading, but saturated fat will raise LDL and LDL will cause heart disease. And then I came across Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, who I know both of us know. And I read his most brilliant book in 2007, The Great Cholesterol Con. And I got to the bit where he said, well, of course, LDL isn't even cholesterol. It's low density lipoprotein. It carries cholesterol, but it also carries protein and phospholipids and triglycerides, as does HDL, which is a high density lipoprotein, as does IDL, which is the intermediate density lipoprotein, and as, quite frankly, do chylomicrons. Any lipoprotein is going to carry those fats around the body to do their amazing work. And I just remember reading that passage, and I'd had all this nonsense from my doctor of, I've done your cholesterol test, and your cholesterol is just brilliant, and your HDL is brilliant, and your LDL is brilliant. And it's like, it's not even cholesterol. And this is my doctor, this is my GP. So then you just question everything. And I think when you've got that mindset, you're that kind of person or you're not that kind of person. But you can become that kind of person when one thing lets you down. So we touched on it in the opening, this whole COVID stuff that's going on at the moment. Only one bit of it needs to not make sense. And then you've got to follow your instinct, and you've got to say, okay, so I read the PCR test shouldn't even be used in the way it's being used. It wasn't invented as a diagnostic, let alone if you ramp it up to 45 cycles, you're going to get something completely meaningless. You're going to have a papaya testing positive for coronavirus, which is what one of the African presidents found. And then start questioning other things. Is there any evidence for social distancing? No, I took a look at it last summer. Jump in if I need to pause for a breath. But I mean, this is just so interesting. When I went to look at the social distancing, the evidence that they used to come up with this idea of 2 meters, they'd gone back to look at MERS, one of the coronaviruses over in the Far East, and they looked at SARS-CoV-1, which was around in 2002 to 2003, and then just died out, which is quite interesting. We just left it alone and it just died out, does what viruses do. And they looked at when people had those viruses confirmed, and then they went back into their households, who in the household then got infected. And they found that pretty much it was only the primary carer. So if you were looking after the person who was sick, if you were sharing a bedroom, whether it was your husband, wife, lover, or it was your sibling, because you had some very big families over in Hong Kong and China where these outbreaks were occurring, those were the people who ended up getting the virus. So what they said is, okay, so if you're really close to someone, you're more likely to get the virus. Let's call that 2 meters. So can you see what they've done? They've gone from you're sharing a bed with someone who's got MERS, which had a 40% fatality rate or something, to saying if you get within 2 meters of a healthy person in the grocery store, in Walmart or whatever, they're somehow comparable. So there's never any evidence for social distancing. And then you looked at the World Health Organization own document from October 2019. What do you do if there's an outbreak of a virus, if it gets to kind of pandemic level? And their own document said, don't close borders. There's no point. Don't close down public transport. Don't close schools. Didn't even mention masks, absolutely did not mention lockdown. It was completely inconceivable that the world would get locked down. That was the view of the World Health Organization. And then suddenly in comes Neil Ferguson from our local college, and he's basically ruined everything for the rest of the world. Imperial, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to the tune of millions. And suddenly we're getting reports coming out saying if we don't lock down, 500,000 people are going to die in the UK, and I don't know how many million they said would die in the US. And suddenly we were doing the exact opposite of what we'd ever done and what we'd ever conceived was a good idea to do. So I can't get my head around what we've done to the world, to human beings, to relationships, to health over the last 20 months. If I think about it, it will destroy me. So I have to not think about it too often, to be honest. It's catastrophic.
Yeah, I think many people are mentally ready to be done with all this sort of kind of nonsense, in my view. And I think, I think and you see a lot of people that are becoming depressed and anxious, and we have, increased suicide rates, and, alcoholism and domestic abuse, and all this stuff has been a secondary side effect of not necessarily a virus, but the response to the viruses. Hey, there was I mean, forgive my ignorance on how the UK runs, but I mean, Boris Johnson, I've seen him. He got sick. He went on, briefly talked about losing weight, and now he's back to. I think I saw he said, "Well, it's too hard to lose weight. Just get an extra jab or something like that." Does it affect Wales? Does he have any impact on Wales, or is Wales completely independent of what Boris Johnson says or does?
I'll explain. I mean, let me just say, I probably should have said what I'm really not happy about is the response to the virus. Please don't for 1 minute take that in any way as being dismissive of the fact that particularly in spring 2020, we had a nasty virus. I mean, you can look at excess mortality in the US, Canada, not Australia, New Zealand, Italy, any of the European countries, UK. We had a spike, there is no question. And there's a very interesting debate to be had on where did it come from, and did it come from a lab? And if it came from a lab, did it jump or was it pushed or whatever? There's some great books being written on that at the moment. So please don't for 1 minute. People have lost their lives. People have lost loved ones. That is not to diminish the virus, but our response to it was wrong. And I think it should have been the response that was set out by the Great Barrington Declaration, which is what I signed. UK is interesting. So 1999, the UK split, and this was under the leadership of Tony Blair, who then got involved with taking everyone to war in Iraq, which in the UK is monumentally unpopular. He is despised like nobody. I don't even know if you have an equivalent in the US of how despised Tony Blair is, but people see him as someone who should be on trial for war crimes. But he was the one who led to the splitting of the UK. So I live in Wales, which is a population of about 3 million. The UK in total is 66 million. Scotland is about 4 million. Northern Ireland, a couple of million. So the bulk of the people are in England. Now, not everything got devolved. So taxation policy, things like, do we put the clocks back? Some really different things are still governed by Westminster, which is Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of the UK. He has a lot of control over a lot of things. But the two things that got devolved were health and education. And of course, all the corona stuff then got added to health bills. So England have a public health bill, Wales have a public health bill. A lot of them are quite similar. But what happened was each leader took the opportunity to seize power. I mean, Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland have been dying to get more power ever since devolution. And suddenly these tin pot dictators that we've got in each of those, particularly, well, our guy in Wales, Mark Drakeford, Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland, just took the opportunity to put in these massively draconian measures. So mask mandates have never been removed in Wales since they were introduced in August. They were removed in England, I think July last year, and then they came back just before Christmas. So there's different things at all times. I'm 10 miles from England. So I now can't go to a cinema in Wales without showing a vaccine passport, and I will not do that. That is a hill I will die on. I do not believe that you should show show your health status on a government app to get into a pub or a cafe or any kind of business. I think travel is slightly different because we're used to showing you need a yellow fever virus jab to get into certain countries. So that is slightly different. But I am not presiding in a country that is going to say, like New York, you can't get into a Starbucks apparently without showing that you've either had a test, which is a medical intervention, or a vaccine, which is a medical intervention, or something else. And that is just so wrong. And the idea that people can't see that it's wrong. And I hear people saying, oh, but I've got my phone to go in the theatre anyway. My ticket is on the phone. I show them my ticket and then I show them my health status. What's the big deal? It's like, okay, so what about when you've got to show your BMI to get into a fast food restaurant? Or you've got to show your step count to get your health insurance? What about then? Where does this end? What about, this is all getting tied up with climate and net zero. What about, oh, you can't have any more red meat because you've already bought red meat once this week. And you can't travel because you traveled last year to go on holiday. This is the ultimate means of controlling the entire population. And this is where the Tony Blair thing comes in, because the Tony Blair Institute massively pushing for jab passports, digital ID, total control of the population. And he's just been given a knighthood. And there's already a petition in the UK. It's got 500,000 signatures in 2 days of people saying, take his knighthood away. And he hasn't even been given the knighthood. It's just, I've never seen a petition take off like that. But this guy and Bill Gates and Neil Ferguson and many others want this. They want to take this opportunity to gain complete control over the population. And then they can achieve whatever aim they want, whether it's net zero or health aims. But yeah, to come back to Boris, Boris apparently nearly died with COVID. Since then has had 3 jabs that won't prevent him getting the thing that he already nearly died from, which I can't quite get my head around. I can understand getting a vaccine to not get something. I can't understand getting a vaccine when you've already had something, but that's just me. But he came out a couple of days ago and said, this is a time of year when people said about losing weight and doing exercise. But hey, it's much easier to go and get your booster jab. Don't go and put all that effort into losing weight. And yet we know, and we knew from data that came out of New York and Italy back in March 2020, we knew that it was up to a 6-fold increase in likelihood of a bad outcome with COVID. And that means hospitalization, ICU, or death if you had a BMI around 40. And it was dose response. You went above 30, it got higher, 50, it's higher still. It was just on a trajectory. And the single biggest thing he could have said right then is, right, global population, lose weight, lose 5% of your body weight if you're overweight or obese, then lose 10%, then lose 15%, and just keep going down on that thing. And we wouldn't have had the death count that we have had, because this is a metabolic disease. It's not in many ways, it's not even a respiratory virus. It's a cardiovascular, sticky blood, metabolic, diabetic disease.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's one I've been making, since the beginning. And it's been unpopular to say that, if you're going to have a host that is compromised, and it's not surprising. I mean, I don't think anyone who has any knowledge of medicine doesn't understand that people that are, compromising their health always have worse outcomes. Doesn't matter if it's a trauma or a respiratory illness or, a surgical procedure, the complication rates are always higher. And the fact that, if I look at the resources that were spent on this pandemic, I think we're into the trillions of dollars in the United States, and a fraction of that could go into, support for people that need to lose weight. It's not that it's easy. You just don't tell, hey, lose weight, and everybody does it, because we've tried that. But there are better ways, as you know. I mean, I sit there every day and people lose weight, and it's not impossible, but it does take some work and some time. And it'd be nice to have even a fraction of that funding that's gone into this. And I do think our outcomes, when I look at places like Japan and Vietnam and some of the African nations, and the African maybe due to reporting data, but I mean, certainly, Japan had a very small mortality rate. And if you look at their BMI statistics, they are a very thin population, and particularly Vietnam. I think Vietnam leads the world in least amount of obesity. I think only 3% of their population is obese. And I think they haven't even had a cumulative total of a few hundred deaths this whole pandemic. And their population is, 30, 40 million, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So it's very interesting. I want to ask you, because you mentioned red meat and cutting the red meat out. And I know that this community is someone who eats a lot of red meat. In fact, I just had a kilo of beef right before I started this interview for breakfast, which, some people think is crazy, but that's just what I do. The data that demonizes that, and you mentioned climate and not being able to eat a steak more than once a week or something like that. What are your thoughts on the data that people claim that red meat is either killing humans, or if you delve into it's killing the planet? What are your thoughts on that? Do you find the evidence for that robust, strong, and convincing to you?
No, the opposite of all of those words. I mean, at the top level, it's what Surgeon Captain Peter Cleve said, for the idea that an ancient food is responsible for modern illness is just absurd. It is what we've evolved to eat. It's good for the planet. It's good for us. It's, as you know, we can actually survive on that and nothing else. And I'm saying this as somebody who was vegetarian for 20 years. So I have seen the other side of the fence. I do understand the arguments for being vegetarian. For me, it was a lot about fluffy animals and not wanting to eat fluffy animals. But I thought I could be healthy enough not eating fluffy animals, and that it would be better for them. And it was only when I left the corporate world and then really started to study nutrition, I realized that I was wrong on both counts. I could not be optimally healthy, certainly, and I don't even think I could be healthy enough not eating meat and fish. Even just having eggs and dairy, it's just not enough. If you're not having red meat, oily fish, you're just not going to get enough zinc, omega-3, iron in the right form is most bioavailable in those foods. It's just not healthy. And I remember the day I'd gone to a Western Price conference in London, and I'd had the privilege of hearing Sally Fallon-Morell speak, and then Barry Groves, rest in peace, speak. And I messaged my husband under the table and I said, I'm coming back a meat eater. And he was like, oh my goodness, I'll get the steak in. And that was the first thing I ate. And I've just had a steak. I have quite an early dinner, so I've just had steak before doing this as well. And it was almost instant in terms of a switch in my body, that I had good health because I wasn't eating junk. I was a healthy eating real food vegetarian, but my moods improved, my female health, my menstrual cycles, my mood swings during the month, it was so rapid. And then you look at the nutrients that are in meats that are just unparalleled to elsewhere, and it wasn't a surprise. So then I thought about the fluffy animal thing. And I remember when I was vegetarian, people would say to me, well, if everyone was vegetarian, then the cows and the sheep wouldn't be in the field. And it never landed. I never understood the point that they were making. You have this cognitive dissonance when your religion is, I'm a vegetarian. Anything that you hear that's counter to that, you don't take on board. But it is true. If everyone in the world were a vegetarian or a vegan, we would not have those fluffy animals, because farmers don't keep pets. They're on the hillside, particularly in Wales. That's exactly where we keep our animals. We don't have any sheds like you do in the US. There's no factory farming. They're out grazing on the land, and then they go off to the abattoir, and then they end up at the butcher's. It's the natural cycle. And then when you realize that their role is to protect topsoil. And without topsoil, we have no means of feeding the planet. You realize how vital those animals are. So that's where I disagree with the mass meat production that goes on in the US, because you've got the land available. Take them out of the cow sheds, for goodness sake, and just have them grazing the land. And if that means meat has to travel from Texas, where there's land, to New York, where there's less land, then so be it. But have the animals grazing in the right place, and then move the meat to the people. But we need to protect topsoil. And topsoil used to be several feet thick, used to have wolves and bison roaming the prairies. Leah Keith writes brilliantly about this. You used to have all of the animal life on the American prairies, and then suddenly they get, fielded over, and now they're cornfields or wheat fields or soya fields, even worse, or barley fields or whatever. And it just destroys topsoil, because the plants take from the land, they don't give anything back to the land. The animals are taking from the land and giving back to the land the whole time. So you've just got this brilliant life cycle, and they're hosts to all these microflora and these animals and bees and zillions of insects and creatures that we just never even see, but they host all of that. And that is nature. That is the complete microflora of the world that we disrespect at our peril. And we have so disrespected it over the last few years. Not only do we concrete over the land and stick the cows in sheds and then give them soya beans that we grew in the Amazon rainforest to eat, which is just, double trouble. We go and give them all these things that they don't need, because they're then getting sick because we put them in the wrong environment. And then any crops that are being grown out there, of course, we then go and spray with GM stuff and glyphosate and destroy any goodness that might actually come from a carbohydrate for someone who can actually tolerate those carbohydrates. It's almost not a surprise that not many people can tolerate carbohydrates anymore, because I think they're chemical delivery mechanisms. I'm not actually sure we're eating the carbohydrates that we would have come across a couple of thousand years ago. Again, that's something that William Davis explored in Wheat Belly. And I think he was very right on that thing. So we've done so much wrong to our environment. The only debate is, can we rescue what's left of it before it's too late?
Yeah, you said an important word there, debate. As you know, particularly around COVID and some of the policies and politics around that, there's been massive censorship. There have been people that, world-class scientists have just been erased, at least from certain places. We've seen that with, several recently. Do you feel that is going to continue into other areas? Do you feel that people that are talking like me saying meat is good for you and can be good for the planet, are we going to head to a place where that is going to be censored? I think we are. I think I've already had experience of that, quite honestly. But are you concerned about that aspect of it, the lack of rigorous scientific debate? The definition of science is, I think many people looking at things and exploring and disagreeing and agreeing and testing and retesting and making alternate hypotheses. What are your thoughts around that?
Totally agree. I mean, science is about debate. If people didn't question things, if I'd never questioned being vegetarian, I would have carried on being vegetarian. If we hadn't questioned the calorie theory, we'd have carried on believing it. We have to question them. And things evolve. And the simplest of questions can lead to someone else realizing something, and then they do a great piece of research, and then better, other things improve. It's like this domino effect of challenge and learn and getting a better outcome, and then challenge again and learn and get a better outcome. And you've always got to be prepared to be wrong. And to say, I think it was Alexander Pope that say, for a man to own that he is wrong is but to say, I know more today than I did yesterday. How is that not a good thing? And people say, she was vegetarian or whatever. She was wrong. I was wrong. And I might be wrong about some things now, but I'm continually looking for evidence and trying to find the right things. The censorship that's gone on with COVID, I have never seen the likes of it. And you're right, since the new year, with Robert Malone being chucked off Twitter, and there's an American politician that's been chucked off Twitter as well, and we've all been heading over to Getter. It's been quite staggering. And I know that the other side's argument is And they always say this: if you were in a movie theater and somebody realized there's a fire, and somebody screams fire, you don't want anyone screaming anything else, because you've got to all just follow the fire, or do the right thing because somebody's screaming it. But I would immediately say, well, what if the person is wrong? And what if the first person who heads off to the exit is heading off towards the wrong exit? They're heading off towards the fire. I'm not just going to follow that person in the theatre because somebody is screaming fire. I'm not going to follow 50 people running in the same direction. You know, you've got a split second. Your adrenaline's going to be going really fast. You're going to think really quickly. I'm going to make my own decision and work out, in this scenario, what do I now do in this scenario? For me, that there is no circumstance for me in which you can never question, you can never make a decision for yourself. You should never look for an alternative and possibly better source of information. But there is one narrative that is being tolerated at the moment. And I think the big debate on COVID is this incompetence? And we got into this mess because of some really bad modeling from Imperial. And then the politicians just don't like to admit they're wrong. So they just double down. And suddenly we're, you know, double mask and 3 jabs and then 6 jabs and 4 masks. And, you know, they just won't let go, because to let go would be to admit they're wrong. Or is there something else going on? And the censorship is the single thing that is most driving me towards thinking there's something else going on, because it just makes no sense. Why would you silence every alternative scientist, every immunologist, every virologist who is daring to say, let's even talk about the idea that there might not be asymptomatic spread, that you've actually got to be sick to be able to pass something on to someone. Let's talk about this idea, can you get it twice? Because if you can't get it twice, that is monumental. You'd never then jab somebody who's already had it. You don't have vaccine passports because you've got to recognize natural immunity. You know, all these debates that would follow from being able to challenge these central tenets. But the idea of healthy people can pass it on, healthy people can get it again, that is putting it into a perpetual cycle of this never ends. And for the pharmaceutical companies, this is every Christmas, 1 million times over with knobs on. You know, it makes statins look like petty cash. And I start to worry that that's where we've headed into, because it's not making scientific sense. It's not making academic sense. And anything that somebody tells me I can't talk about makes me suspicious. It makes me want to talk about. And anything where I'm being coerced into doing something, I'm suspicious about. That's just who I am. I'm a suspicious little nerd. If somebody says you've got to roll your sleeve up 6 times over the next year, I want to know why. I want to know what I'm going to get out of it. I want to know what the risk-benefit analysis is. And if I'm not even allowed to ask those questions, I'm just going to be even more suspicious. And I think that's where a number of people are getting to now. I think more in the US. The UK is still terrified. The UK still thinks we're living with a completely deadly virus, and they think half of the people are going to die if they get it. You know, try 3 in 1,000 back in spring of last year, and only those who had about 4 comorbidities. You know, a healthy 84-year-old doesn't really need to worry about it. And what we've seen over the winter in the UK, we've had this new variant explosion, and it might finally break the psychosis in the UK, because if I had $1 for every person who said to me over the last 3 weeks, was that it? It was like I had a cold. I tested positive for COVID, but it was so mild, I've had worse colds. It's like, okay, that's what this Omicron variant or whatever it is, that's what it seems to have become. So can we now all just please move on and realize we get viruses every year, and flu kills 50,000 people in the UK every year, and that is terribly sad. But 1,700 people die every day in the UK. It's a fact of life. 1 in 100 people in the UK will die every year. It's sad. It's a fact of life. We've got to get better at dealing with death. And I'm sorry if that makes me sound like a callous mathematician, but I am a mathematician. Hopefully I'm not callous, but that's just a fact.
Yeah, I also had COVID earlier this year in November, and again it was 2 or 3 days of kind of cold-like symptoms, and I missed 1 workout basically. I mean that was the effect on me. But We see, and speaking of some of these drugs, I saw some statistic where, like, I think Pfizer might be making $1,500 a minute or even a second or something like that, some ridiculous outlay of money that they're just hauling in on a ridiculous, a pace. And, as they get more and more wealthy, then they gain more and more control and they have more and more influence. And I've seen where they basically, strong arm countries into saying, well, we will allow you to have some of our vaccine if you agree to our, sort of crazy terms, which is kind of crazy on that. Do you find that with the and I was just looking, by the way, I looked at your Getter account because I just recently joined today, and I see you've got, happily to see, you've got more followers on Getter than you do on Twitter, which I thought is really interesting to see. So there's a lot of people on there already, and already people are sort of migrating by the masses over there, and hopefully maybe that'll change the censorship policy, because it is becoming crazy. I mean, I've been suspended from YouTube for the 4th time in 5 months for talking about stuff that is clearly easily verifiable, but yet it's considered by some 22-year-old journalism major to be misinformation. It's complete nonsense. But we've only got a couple more minutes left, Zoe. Tell me, so why don't we spend this time to let people know, well, anything else you want to share, and then let people know about where to find you, because I know people are commenting saying, wow, Zoe's great, she's very articulate and somebody I want to learn more about. So where do they go to find you, and if there's anything else you'd like to share?
Okay, thank you. Just on the Getter thing, by the way, if you've got a verified account on Twitter, when you get one on Getter, it asks you, do you want your Twitter heritage to come over? So it actually takes all your tweets over, and it can take over your followers as well. So I'll be really honest, I think my actual Getter followers are the difference between the Getter followers and the Twitter followers. So I know I've got 130,000 or so on Twitter. Let's say I've got 135,000 on Getter. I haven't looked. Then I would have 4,000 on Getter. But they just seem to give you that option. So, and we kind of all went over as a bit of a protest with the Robert Malone thing. So, I WhatsApped a few friends, and a few friends were WhatsApping other friends. And it's just like, hey, let's just get over there. I mean, I'm not saying we're completely leaving Twitter, but just every time you post anything on Twitter, you're second guessing, thinking, is this the one that's going to get me banned? I mean, the one that got Robert Malone banned, he tweeted a link to the Canadian COVID Association or something. They had done, you have to watch this presentation, the most brilliant presentation on the dissection of the Pfizer trial. Now, I had looked at it. So I did an article on my website back in December 2020. I was really nervous about doing it because I thought everyone's going to say, oh, you're anti-vax. Like, I'm not anti-vax. I've had every vaccine in my entire life. I've just not had any gene therapy yet. I might one day, but I haven't so far. But I looked at the efficacy, and of course you look at the relative risk and the absolute risk. So I had worked out back then, the minute the paper came out, you're looking at a 0.84 absolute risk difference. And that was during their trial, which we now know from the BMJ, there's a whistleblower, had some issues with it and all the rest of it. But they just go through in this presentation the fact that they unblinded, the fact that they then let the people in the placebo have the jab so that they then don't have a controlled experiment going forward, despite the fact that the children's trial doesn't finish until May 2026. The adult trial doesn't finish until 2023. These are trials still going on. And I looked at all of that, and I'd looked at the Peter Doshi BMJ stuff where he was saying, the trials hadn't even explored whether this would reduce transmission or bad outcomes. It was only, did you test positive and have one symptom, and that's all it was. So that is the kind of thing that I think people should be going out there and looking at. How do they find me? I'm just at Zoë Harcombe, Z as you guys say it, ZOEHARCOMBE, and that's me on Twitter, that's me on Getter. My website is zoeharcombe.com. My business model is basically I dissect academic papers. So every Monday I produce a note, and it looks at something that's been in the news the previous week or month or something. Mostly my subscribers recommend it to me. So they'll say, hey, there's been another article attacking red meat, or an article attacking the keto diet, or carnivore is going to kill you, or carbs are going to save you, or even, I don't know, aspirin is going to be really helpful for cancer or heart disease. And they'll ask me to take a look at it. And so that's kind of what I do. And you'll get a couple of thousand words into your email on a Monday morning. And I dissect the article so you don't have to. And there's quite a lot on OpenView. So if you want to go and have a look, and if it's on OpenView, read it. And if you don't want to subscribe, that's not a problem at all. And that's kind of what I do. And thank you for people that do support me. I think it's a $1 a week or something if you pay for the annual, which is not too bad. So that's me. Thank you for asking.
Well, thanks. So you're at 139,000 on Getter, just by the way. So
oh, thank you. I never checked.
Anyway, keep up the good work. Keep fighting. I think, the more of us that are brave enough to stand up there and saying the emperor has no clothes, and we'll make something happen. Anyway, thank you. Enjoy your evening in Wales. I look forward to talking to you again. And hopefully see you in person at some point in this crazy world, but have a great day. And can we get you to come back again sometime down the road?
Totally. I'd love to. And thanks for what you're doing as well, Shawn, because our nutrition world has been split. Mostly we've asked the same questions of COVID as we have of nutrition, but not all. So we have lost some friendships in this world, and that's very disappointing, because friendships are really valuable. So thank you for what you've done. And anyone out there, if you don't like what I'm saying on COVID, I still like you as a person. So I hope we can keep those nutrition avenues open.
Likewise. Anyway, okay. Thanks, guys. We'll see everybody tomorrow. We got Dr. Bill Schindler tomorrow. You guys take care. Have a great one, Zoe. Say
bye.
Bye-bye.
Join Revero.health for a 30-day free trial to get access to live Q&A with VIP guests, social community meetings, member discounts, low-carb healthcare providers list, forum, workouts, monthly challenges, early access to podcasts, recipes, carnivore diet guide, fasting guide, shred guide, and much more.